Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 16.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, Vanessa Maria Graber will report on the mayor's press conference regarding the proposed drug treatment facility in the Northeast. Lance Haver will discuss insurance rates, and Denise Clay-Murray will preview 2025 in Philadelphia government and politics. And I don't see who's here. Who do we got, Allison? All right. All right. So what we're going to do then is call a quick audible because we don't seem to have some of our people connected. So, Lance, I'm going to bring you on if that's all right.
That sounds fine. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to our viewers.
Mm-hmm.
I hope everyone had a good holiday. And I will say happy holidays, just to make sure. I see Vanessa is going to be joining us shortly, so I'll make my report very brief. For those of you who buy homeowners insurance, what I'm reporting on is no secret. Homeowners insurance has skyrocketed over the last 2 years. The average increase has been 44%. Now, that shows up in a number of different ways. For many people, homeowners insurance is included in the mortgage payment. So for those of us in Philadelphia, we're seeing a double whammy. Not only are we paying the higher interest rates, we're also paying higher taxes, and now we're paying higher insurance. So for people who have had their mortgage in place for a couple of years, the mortgage payments are going up because the insurance companies are getting away with these double-digit rate increases. And it's not as if the insurance companies need the money. If you look at the stock prices for the major insurance companies, what you're going to see is that they've all been going outside of any reasonable amount. Berkshire Hathaway, which owns Geico Insurance Company, their stock rose in the last 2 years from $319 to $451. MetLife, another major insurance company, from $51 to $83. And AIG, many of us remember that is the insurance company that was too big to fail, that the American taxpayers bailed out, gave them a lifeline, saved all their executives. They've not only raised their rates, they've also raised their stock prices from $48.78 to $72.81. Now, one of the major problems is you can't have a mortgage or a loan unless you're exceedingly wealthy without homeowners insurance. Now, if you're very wealthy, you can borrow against your investments. But for most of us, the only way we can buy a home is with a mortgage, and no mortgage company, which, by the way, a number of the insurance companies are also mortgage companies, no mortgage company is going to allow someone to buy a home without having homeowners insurance. So when we say the insurance prices are skyrocketing, going out of control, what we're really saying is the insurance companies are the modern day redliners. They're the ones who are deciding which neighborhoods can be invested in and which neighborhoods can't. And they do it in various ways. For example, an insurance company might decide they're not going to sell homeowners insurance to any house that has a flat roof. Or they may decide they're not going to offer homeowners insurance on a block that has a vacant home. And so what this ends up doing is ends up sending that neighborhood into distress. It would be different if our government was actually fighting for us. Now, it really matters tremendously that everybody should have access to homeowners insurance. Every neighborhood should be safe. The Pennsylvania Insurance Commissioner's Office doesn't say what they've been doing to fight for homeowners and to fight to keep rates down. They do have a press release that says that they have saved consumers $98 million. So we contacted the Pennsylvania Insurance Company and said, what does this mean? Which rate increase did you deny? Because Pennsylvanians have seen rates go up. So what rate increase did you deny? And can you please send us a list of all the companies whose rate increases you denied? And the answer was, well, they don't have time to do that. They'll get to us maybe sometime in the next month or so. But that even though the press release says they saved us $98 million, it doesn't mean that they lowered rates. What they're saying is rates would have gone up $98 million, even more than what they've already gone up, had the state played no role. Now, there's not a state insurance commissioner. There is no hearing, nobody is notified by the insurance company that rates are about to go up. So if it was a utility company and it was regulated by the Public Utility Commission, there would be a notice, there'd be something in the mail, you would know that you're looking at a rate increase. When it comes to insurance, for most of us, the only time we know that the rates are going up is when the mortgage company sends us a new mortgage payment and says you have to pay more. Consumer Reports, which is the magazine of the Consumer Union, the nonprofit organization that fights for consumers, has been struggling to try and get these numbers released from the insurance companies so we can see how much overcharge there is. If you think about it, insurance starts out as a wonderful concept. We all put in $1. If someone has a loss, that money goes to pay off the loss. The next year, we look at whether there was a surplus or a deficit, and maybe we say everyone has to put in $1.50, or maybe we say everyone has to put in 75%. But in 2000, when Bill Clinton was the president and he deregulated the financial industry, most of the mutual insurance companies that gave money back to their policyholders went through a process which is called demutualization, which means they turned out from not-for-profit mutual institutions to for-profits, and they did it in very underhanded ways. For example, Liberty Mutual, which still calls itself Liberty Mutual, is a mutual company, but that mutual company owns 3 for-profit insurance companies. So the company you get your insurance from is a for-profit. The company that owns all of them is a mutual. So the profits go into the company, and you don't get anything back because it's a stockholder-owned utility. Consumer Reports is asking now for consumers who are concerned to sign a petition asking the insurance companies and asking the federal government to force the insurance companies to release the data so we can see how much we're being overcharged. We sent out an email. We'll send it out again this week. It'll be on our webpage. Those of you who are struggling with rising home insurance rates, seeing your mortgages go up, having trouble finding it, please think about signing the petition I already have. And just a word of caution. I know people say, well, shop around. And that always sounds like good advice, but it makes it very difficult because the antitrust laws are not used to keep the insurance companies in line. So insurance companies can have what they call forgiveness. For example, they'll say if you haven't made a claim in a number of years, the next claim that you file, you won't see a rate increase. So if you shop around, you lose that protection. And I think most of us know that insurance companies are unique in that they get to sell you a product, the insurance policy, and then if you actually use it, you file a claim, they get to surcharge you for actually using the product you bought. So can you imagine what would happen if a washing machine company did that? You buy a washing machine for $1,000, and every time you turn it on, the washing machine company sends you another bill, says you've got to pay more, you actually use what you bought. That's what insurance companies do, and that's why it's so difficult to shop around. So with that, it's a very difficult struggle to be engaged in, but I'm hoping people will go online, look at our webpage, and think about joining me and joining Consumer Union and asking that these numbers be released so we can see how much we're being overcharged.
Well, Lance, thank you very much for that, as always. And it's another one of those things where I look at it and say, well, where are the regulators in this? You know, why aren't they doing what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, it's the state actually has now contracted out. They don't even keep track of the hearings themselves. They've got a third party that does it all. And you can't find any written decision. So you can see the date it's filed. You can see what the insurance company filed. The contracting company doesn't say what the state says. There's no written decision deciding whether the increase should go through or not. All you see is something that says approved. And in some instances, when you look at these filings, it takes 3 days from the time the insurance company submits a request for a rate increase and it's approved. So there's really not a lot of time for a consumer to say, hey, what's going on here? It's a difficult situation. We'll talk more about it in the weeks and months to come. And what we'll hopefully do is find an pending insurance rate increase and help people walk through the process of how they can intervene.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that, as always. If you want to know more about this, see Lance's article in yesterday's newsletter. Very informative, very important. And you can also sign the petition there, which I recommend everybody does. So, Lance, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week on the show. And now I'd like to bring up Vanessa Maria Graber and Denise Clay-Murray. We'll bring you both up here.
Hi.
How are you both doing today? Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Happy New Year. I'm doing well. Thank you. Glad to be back.
Good. Yeah. I've been looking forward to this for 2 weeks now. Incidentally, by the way, I looked at the calendar because I was going through our Hall Monitor 2025, like when are the key dates. Christmas and New Year's are a Wednesday again this year, which means it'll be 2 weeks without a show at the end of the year again. So no luck there. But anyway.
I guess that's our Christmas vacation.
Yeah, so we'll worry about that when we get
Great.
there. But Vanessa, I want to start with you. You were something very important today. This is something we've been waiting on for over a year. You know, at first they were called triage centers, and now I'm not sure what we're calling it. But today, the mayor and her administration sort of previewed what they've spent, I don't know, a portion of that $100 million on that they got from City Council. So can you tell us a little bit about this and what you saw today?
Yeah, so today, the mayor and her administration, along with the building trades unions, had a grand opening and press event to open the Riverview Wellness Center. This is located out on State Road next to CFCF, the jail. And it is a facility that is owned by the city, was acquired in the early 1900s, and was sitting vacant for a long time. And so we've seen in the last year various iterations and descriptions of this plan. And so many of us in the media were eager to see how this actually materialized. And I got to say, I have a lot of questions, but I also was really surprised at how lovely the facility is. It is a facility located right by the river. And so it's pretty scenic, even though it's about 29 degrees out. And it's very large. It's made up of a bunch of little buildings, which they call cottages, and a meeting house. And this is what they called a recovery home. And so contrary to different versions of the plan to deal with the opioid crisis that we might have heard of before, again, there was not a lot of transparency and a lot of detailed plans about what was going to happen. We finally saw that this is actually going to be a place where people can go after they have completed drug rehabilitation treatment. And so it is not somewhere people would go right after going through what they're calling the wellness court. So if somebody is arrested and taken to the wellness court after, I'm sorry, my doggy knocked over the light here and he's a little scared. These are the challenges of doing live programming from your home. But so if somebody is taken in from Kensington, say, or another place in the city, they're arrested and they have the option to do a drug diversion program, aka, drug treatment, or go to jail, and they choose drug treatment, they then would have to go to one of the city's providers of drug treatment. And then when they complete the treatment program, they would have the ability to go to a recovery home. And so we learned today that there are 500 beds currently available in the city of Philadelphia, and all of them are filled but 3. And that there's currently a 200-person awaiting. Sorry. We're going to have to add this to the bloopers reel. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm going to go off camera for just a second. So basically, this is a residential program where people can go to live after completing a drug rehab program. So it is not a treatment program. It is not a detox program. It is recovery housing. Now, the equivalent of this is housing that people who have completed alcohol treatment. They go into what's called sober living. And I know several people who are in recovery who have gone through the sober living process. And basically, when you get out of rehab and you are not able to find stable housing, you go into sober living. Most of the time it's in a group home situation, and there are sober living houses all over the city and outside the city. Some of them are run privately, some of them are run by churches, some of them are run by public organizations. And the point is to not live there permanently, but it's kind of like a transition. The other equivalent would be halfway house, when somebody is coming out of prison and they go into a transition type of housing until they can become truly independent. And so again, they wanted to emphasize, like, this isn't a detox program. They're not going to be taking people off the street and putting them in here. That is not what's happening here. It's also not jail. And I know I will be the first to admit that I was really skeptical about this because of the location and how people were describing it. It is next to the jail. And if you've ever been on State Road, CFCF, it is a huge complex. There are many buildings. There's a lot of barbed wire. There's a lot of security. So it is quite jarring when you drive up that way. And before I got to Riverview, I did actually go to the jail at first mistakenly, and then they sent me back around. So I could see why people would confuse it with the jail, but they did clarify that this is not a jail. This is just a transition housing type of place. Now, in the facility, they're able to get workforce training programs. They're still going to be attending outpatient drug rehabilitation programs. They have mental health specialists and staff working in the building. And one of the really cool things is, I don't know if you remember Dr. Alana Stanford, who runs the Black Doctors Consortium, who built a clinic after the pandemic. She has a facility within the Riverview Wellness Center. And so I had the opportunity to tour the clinic that she's operating, to be able to provide health services to the people living there. They even have little offices dedicated to wound care. So like I said, I was really impressed. A lot of the information leading up to this was rather unclear. So even as I sat next to a colleague from another news outlet, we had a lot of questions. They're like, what is this going to be? What do they have here? And right now they have the opportunity to house 300 people. They're looking to expand the facilities and provide housing for another 300. So coupled with the currently available 500 beds that people are in right now, they are going to add 300 more, and they're going to start the wellness treatment court on January 21st. And that is when they are also going to be able to take people into this facility. There's multiple ways people can enter the facility. They can come in through direct outreach to some of the city services, like the Office of Homeless Services, for example, referrals from other organizations, and they can come directly from treatment providers. Right now, there is a waiting list with over 200 people that need housing that have just finished treatment programs. So those are the first 200 people that are going to be invited to come and apply for a spot there. And so that is the latest. The other thing that I learned is that, the big question, right? What happened to the $100 million? They've currently spent over $40 million. I think they said something around $43 million. And they still have, around half of the money to continue to spend. No, I'm sorry. I had the opposite. They spent $56 million. So they have about $44 million to spend. They still have to raise an additional $50 to $75 million, because the total cost is actually not $100 million. It's much more of that. This service, these facilities and resources are completely funded by the city. So they have funding for this fiscal year. It is in the strategic plan for the city to provide funding for the first 5 years. Beyond that, they did not say who would be footing the bill for this. So this is not being paid for by Medicaid or any federal services. This is coming from the city's tax budget right now They are looking to the federal government to provide additional resources, although with the incoming Trump administration, I'm a little bit dubious about that. And they're also looking for the private sector to continue to invest. One of the other providers that will be on site to provide mental health treatment is Amerikeet. And like I said, the Black Doctors Consortium to provide medical services. And so they're going to continue building and expanding on the site. And they did not say when the additional 300 units would be available, but they were hoping by this year. And then my question to the staff was, what is going to happen at the end of the year if people do not secure housing, right? Because the idea is that they would come out of rehab, go into this residential place, this treatment center for 1 year, and then they would go into quote unquote independent living. And we know how hard it is to find the funds for first month's, last month's, on security deposit, and also that it's very difficult for people with criminal records to pass background checks for some places. And a lot of people are disabled. So there is a lot of difficulty in the city to find affordable housing. And so they continue to be hopeful and emphasize Managing Director Thiel's project to build 30,000 affordable housing units. And so they're hoping that some of those units will be available to those residents by the time they complete that program. So we'll have to continue following up with the Managing Director's office to see the timeline and the progress for that. There wasn't a lot of information available about that. But as you know, people that work in the field of mental health and substance use disorder treatment and people in harm reduction are very concerned about people's ability to find long-term affordable housing once they have completed treatment.
I guess my question, Vanessa, is there was this ACLU letter that went out about the recovery centers and possible civil liberties issues. Can you talk a little bit about that? And did that come up during the press conference?
So I would not call it a press conference at all. They gave a bunch of speeches, and by they it was Mayor Sherrell Parker, Managing Director Thiel, and the Public Safety Director Adam Greer. And they took 2 questions from the press, and then they ended it abruptly. Afterwards, during the tour, we were able to ask questions to the people that were some of the staff members overseeing the program. So the questions that I asked were to Isabel McDevitt. But yes, certainly us, in the press, we're talking amongst ourselves about the ACLU letter, about the potential legal challenges to the wellness treatment court, and whether or not it would stand up if a lawsuit was brought about by the ACLU and the attorneys and other organizations that co-signed that letter. And so they expressed a lot of concern about very quickly forcing people to choose between drug treatment program and jail, and that wasn't enough time for people to make a sound decision, and that especially people who have been under the influence of drugs and alcohol need at least 2 days to be able to be of sound mind to make those decisions. There's also a concern that Curtis Jones's bill that was passed several years ago, which decriminalized 4 different crimes in the city, and change those into summary offenses, which would just yield fines, that they were actually not going to be following the law that City Council already passed. And that the Defenders Association in different press and in the letter, I believe, had said that they were going to be working and ready to defend the people going that. But a lot of people would potentially choose to go to court and take the fine and argue that it is a summary offense and would not want to go into forced treatment. And so there's a lot of questions about how they're going to get people into drug treatment. Now, once people are into drug treatment programs, they have the ability to choose whether or not they want to go into a transition housing program like a recovery home. That's definitely more open. But one of the questions that, I talked with another reporter about is like, well, what if nobody chooses forced drug treatment? Like, what if they're picking up all these people and they're all choosing to go to court or take the fine or go to jail? Like, then how are they going to be able to get people in here? And so again, there's a lot of questions remaining about the drug treatment diversion programs and the constitutionality of the wellness court. And the mayor and her staff did not answer any questions about that. And also, when asked by other reporters, such as Kensington Voice reporters who did a story on it yesterday, the city offered no comment. So we're going to have to wait and see if a lawsuit is forthcoming and if this actually is going to go to court.
Now, you also mentioned that there are currently 500 beds available for drug treatment in the city, and that all but 3 of them are occupied right now.
That's correct.
You have this recovery center that people will be able to go to once they have completed drug treatment. But how can you go to a center after you've completed drug treatment when you are not able to access drug treatment? Was there any talk about increasing the amount of drug treatment so that you could get more people to take advantage of these programs because they've gotten treatment?
Yeah, again, this is something that we're trying to understand. They reported that right now that there were 1,700 beds available across the city from all of the different providers, and that includes the private providers, and that they had a big meeting of all of the treatment providers in the city, and they were able to calculate that 1,700 inpatient beds were available for drug treatment. Now, they didn't say that all 1,700 beds were occupied. Although, if you talk to people who are in harm reduction, they will say that it is really hard to get people into inpatient drug treatment. And so I think we're going to have to do some further research there to calculate the number of people that need access to inpatient drug treatment versus that 1,700 beds that are currently being provided. I got the impression that the city felt that that was adequate, right? Because they didn't talk about increasing that number or the need to come in and get more providers to have more beds available. And so I do think that the difficulty is, like, say they got a bunch of money and treatment providers were able to offer more beds. If people are routinely refusing to go to treatment for various reasons, that is a really important challenge that's kind of like at the beginning of this entire intake process. And we've heard from people like some of the reasons why they don't want drug treatment, and especially when it's optional, right? Yet alone when it's forced or mandated by the local government. And some of those reasons include, not being able to properly detox, a very complicated process to enter and do the intake for that, being sent far away or not being close to their families, not having access to their phone and having really strict rules. Like, there's a lot of reasons why drug treatment programs can be a barrier for people.
And one of the things that we learned last summer was that not all 1,700 beds are created equal. There's different classifications, and some are for people who are dealing with substance abuse. Some are for substance abuse with severe injuries from xylazine. Some are for substance abuse, severe injuries, and severe mental issues. So when you start breaking them down by classification, there's actually fewer for just, let's say, general substance abuse than there are for, of those 1,700.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that there's a lot of concern about the growing number of people that have very complex wounds and infections from the wounds, along with other infectious diseases like tuberculosis and hepatitis, and these facilities not being equipped to be able to address those medical needs, which are really different than addressing people's mental health and substance abuse disorder. There's also not a lot of treatment providers that provide culturally competent services for Spanish speakers, for example, or for youth, or for Black residents. And so, yeah, those 1,700 beds are not all the same. The treatment providers vary. They are in different parts of the city. And also, with some of the programs, you have to be a Philadelphia resident. Otherwise, you're being sent back to where you live. And we know that a lot of the people in Kensington that are drug users are not from Philadelphia. This is a problem that I also saw in Camden as well. There was a lot of people coming to Camden to use drugs, and to be able to access the services, you have to be a Camden County resident. And then people lack transportation and support to be able to go back to where their town was. And so we see this in Philadelphia as well. And so I think it would be great for us to bring on some treatment providers onto this show to be able to ask more questions about how these processes work. And also, what is the I guess, attrition rate, for people to complete drug rehabilitation programs, and how many people from those folks who complete drug treatment programs are likely to go into a sober living residential home situation. It is a big commitment to do that. It requires a lot of support and resources. I think that there are a lot of people that have their families supporting them and they have these support systems, but there's a lot of people who are completely alone. We see a lot of foster kids who have placed out of the system, who wind up homeless, who also have addiction issues, and they don't have the same type of support network surrounding them that other people do. So it's really complex. There's a lot of questions. I will say, though, I was impressed by the facility. It's absolutely beautiful. It is high quality. I mean, it looks really nice. It looks comfortable. I was impressed with the Black Doctors Consortium being inside the facility, and the Black doctors being there to show us the different services that they'd be providing. And the idea that they're going to be building more residential housing and studio apartments, I thought was really exciting to have 300 more beds available for people. It's certainly a drop in the bucket for the need, right? Because if there's 1,700 people and only 500 beds currently available, right, there's still a lot of work to do. Even if the city opens this facility with 300 more beds, that's only about 800, right, out of 1,700. So there's still a discrepancy there. And, one of the questions I had is, when the mayor was talking about not supporting using city tax dollars to pay for things like needle exchange and other harm reduction services, because she said city resources were very scarce, it made me go back to the arena discussion, right? And wonder why it's acceptable to give billionaires hundreds of millions of dollar tax break, when in the same breath you're saying that tax revenue is scarce, therefore making resources very limited and having to make tough choices about what services you could provide. She also said that the private sector needed to step up and fill the gaps because the city wasn't going to be able to do it. So I found that interesting because, again, one of the main concerns with the arena proposal was the idea that we are going to allow the 76ers organization to get away with not paying their fair share in taxes for the next 30 years.
Now, doesn't the city also get a percentage of the opioid settlement money? And wasn't that what was financing a lot of needle exchange?
That is correct. There was a lawsuit, of course. There are many lawsuits regarding opioid manufacturing and pharmaceuticals and the role that they played in facilitating the opioid crisis and people's addiction to their products. And so from that settlement money, some of it was used to fund harm reduction. Of course, we don't know. I don't know. Maybe the information is out there. I would have to do more research on where that money is being diverted. But it seemed like a good use of the money from the settlement of the opioid crisis to go back into the community that was harmed by those pharmaceutical manufacturers.
All right. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for that. And stay on for a second if you don't mind, because now we're going to move into I guess, which is the obvious, 2025, right? We're here in 2025, and this is going to be a big year in the city. There's a lot going on. Vanessa, you just talked about one of the, hopefully, one of the solutions to what's happening in Kensington, one of the things that will help stem the tide. But there's a lot of other things going on in the city. Denise Clay-Murray, what do you think is going to happen in 2025, and what are some of the key issues that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, I'm keeping an eye on affordable housing because no matter what we talk about here on Hall Monitor, the subject of affordable housing almost always comes up. There is always some connection to it, whether it's finding people a place to go after competing drug treatment, or just, helping a mother of 3 find a place where she and her kids can live that doesn't have rats in it and doesn't cost her, doesn't make it so she has to work 3 jobs to be able to pay for it. So I'm keeping an eye on that. And it's funny that Vanessa mentioned that the treatment part wasn't something that the mayor was interested in the city paying for, because I want to keep my eye on the city budget. I want to see what does get paid for. And we all have to remember that at the end of the mayor's 5-year plan, she has basically left like $14 million of the city's fund balance by the time it's done. So it'll be interesting to see if that gets addressed, because while having a fund balance, for most people would be like, well, the city has money. Why don't we spend it? We have to be extra careful as a city, because we have been mentioned by name by a very vengeful man with a whole lot of power, and that would be President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the relationship that Philadelphia could count on having with the White House under Joe Biden, we no longer have. In fact, this is a man that's talking about annexing Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. So we're looking at Manifest Destiny 2.0. If he's doing that to other people, I can only imagine what Philly is looking at. So we need to make sure we have the pennies set aside to take care of whatever craziness Donald Trump could possibly throw at us.
Well, it's all that aside, because that's crazy what we're dealing with on a national front. But locally, a few years ago, the city was looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in fund as a fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of things happened from between that time and now, in just those couple of years. The city spent more, which I don't think is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, I'm for spending the money for things that people need. We can argue about what people need and if that money was spent properly, but fine. But then they cut taxes. And I think a lot of members of city council were surprised the year after they cut taxes that the fund balance was going to be so low in the 5-year plan. And I very distinctly remember us having a conversation on this program the week after they passed that tax cut, saying, in 5 years, this could be a problem. And here it is. We're looking at a $14 million fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
And that means the money left over after the city pays all its bills
Mm-hmm.
and everything it's projected to spend. $14 million. That's a drop in the bucket. And we don't, and quite frankly, and I share your concern, Denise, we don't know what the next few years are going to be like in Philadelphia. I'm very concerned about maybe put it politely, a redirection of federal funds away from the city being cut off entirely. We don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not trying to be alarmist, but with who's coming into office, we're dealing with a kid with a lighter here. We don't know what he's going to burn down next. So there's great concern here. And what I'm encouraged by a little bit is city council seems to be taking this seriously. We know that Councilmember Rue Landau is going to be having some hearings coming up where she talks about these issues. Mm-hmm. What are the next few years going to be like under the Trump administration again? I can't believe we're doing this again. But yeah, what's it going to be like? And what can we do to prepare? I think that's crucial. I think that's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I agree. One of the questions at the press conference today to Mayor Parker was how she was going to work with President Trump's administration in the future, especially as it regards to like federal funding for substance abuse treatment. And there's a lot of federal funds through HHS and other agencies. And she gave an answer that was very different than what Mayor Kenney would have said. Obviously, they had a more adversarial relationship. But she said that she was more than willing to work with President Trump and Vice President Vance, and that she also had just had a conversation with our new U.S. Senator, Senator McCormick, and the new Republican Congress people, and that she was going to pull everybody together so they could work together. And she said something a little off-putting, which, I don't know how Democratic constituents would receive this, but I'm willing to work with anybody who can give me resources and get the job done.
Well, see, this is the same delusion that this woman had been working under the entire 2023 mayoral primary. She put herself out there as the Harrisburg Whisperer because she was like, oh, well, I worked with these people before. I can work with anybody. And the thing is, she was under the impression that the same Republicans that she worked with as a state rep were the same ones that are currently in office. And the ones that are currently in office are nuts. Well, they are totally different people. And she's under this impression that, by the sheer force of her personality, that she will be able to get resources from them. And I'm like, ma'am, I really need you to, take a long and realistic look at the people you are talking about being able to get resources from. Because the rest of us are looking at you and seeing that if it weren't for the fact that Josh Shapiro was the governor, SEPTA would be, knocking us over with some really nasty fare increases.
Right, have one foot in the grave. But one of the questions that I have that I'm still very concerned about: how is Mayor Parker going to view the city's sanctuary city status?
Yeah, and it's interesting to contrast that with the way Rue Landau has been talking about it in terms of getting organized, preparing to defend against these policies. Now, keep in mind, Councilmember Landau was a human rights attorney for a large part of her career. Mm-hmm. So that rhetoric comes directly out of that experience where she's talking about policies and laws that are going to come down the pipeline and how we can use legal mechanisms to defend against them. She said at that rally for Sanctuary City something to the effect of, we're going to investigate every legal mechanism we have at the city of Philadelphia to prevent these harmful policies from impacting our immigrant community. And so that showed me, as a former attorney, she was preparing to see, what are the things we can do, lawsuits, and, how do we pass, how do we use the state laws, and states' rights to be able to overcome some of these things. They're looking for legal loopholes. They're looking for Supreme Court precedents. And so that was interesting to me because it shows that they're preparing to defend the city as opposed to trying to play nice with a administration that has very openly made racist comments against all communities of color.
Yeah.
And so, and again, what you see on the left happening right now in a lot of grassroots and mutual aid organizations is very much this: preparing for defense, preparing for mutual aid, figuring out what are the networks we need to form, how are we informing ourselves about these potential policies and laws that are going to get passed, right? People are very much organizing to defend, and definitely not waiting to see what happens and being nice to people that are going to oppress them. And so I am very concerned about the immigrant community. And of course, immigrants make up many different kinds of legal statuses, right? Mm-hmm. It's not all immigrants are undocumented. Not all immigrants have citizenship. Some people are here on all kinds of different, statuses, like temporary protective status, student visas, temporary residency. People have green cards. People are on the 90-day fiance visa, right? Like there's many. And actually, you learn a lot in that show about how hard it is, right, to come here into this country, like what the challenges are. And I think that we need to be nuanced when we talk about the immigrant community. And also, a lot of immigrants are married to Philadelphia residents, right? They have children here who are American citizens, right? And so there's very much an interwoven fabric here in Philadelphia and a long history of immigrants coming to Philadelphia to make it their home.
Right.
And it is really disappointing that the mayor has not really taken a position on this and has just repeated the mantra of a clean green.
Whoever put that line together for her, I really hope they got compensated and compensated well for that, because that has become the most worked out line in city government. Everybody in the cabinet says it.
So she said it today, Denise, and I chuckled and I thought of you. I was like, how long before she says it? And it was probably like 2 minutes into her speech where she said,
with that got compensated well.
I hate to say this, but it's like akin to Make America Great. It's like a whole lot of nothing, right? But yet it becomes a tagline for the kind of administration and policies that they're promoting. And so when we look at 2025, I'm very concerned about what's not being said, right? Like there's also no talk of the climate crisis as we see devastating videos of Los Angeles, a metropolitan city, being burned, right? Do we remember when 676 was underwater and people were kayaking on the Vine Street Expressway? We're seeing floods that are historic, that have never happened all across the country, that have been devastating. Like look at what happened to North Carolina and Tennessee after Hurricane Helene. It is entirely possible for our city to be flooded, right? And for tornadoes to come. We are seeing tornadoes all over the state of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and South Jersey that have never happened before. And yet there's no talk of how we're preparing for the climate crisis and how we can lower emissions. The cleaner, greener city does not talk about those things. And I think a lot of young people especially are very concerned about that. And lastly, I'll say, with the race for district attorney, crime and public safety is still going to be a major concern. Like even recently, right, the mayor had a press conference because of all the shootings that happened. There was like 20 people shot in one weekend. The crime and violence continues to plague our city, even though the number of homicides has gone down. You might have known I've been looking into the number of people disappearing in the city, and there is a really high number. If you go to the Philadelphia Crime Blotter website put on by the police department, you will scroll for minutes and minutes, tons of missing persons. Some of them are found, a lot of them are gone. We have no idea what's happening with these cases. There's not a lot of media coverage, and that's also part of the public safety problem. And so, again, arresting all the drug users doesn't address the poverty that fuels a lot of the violence around the city. Arresting drug users does nothing to solve domestic violence, which makes up for the majority of violence against women, and it does nothing to stop a lot of the violence against our LGBT community.
Right. And Vanessa, we talk about poverty a lot on this show. I think it's probably our number one issue in general. I'm very concerned. Now, the poverty rate has decreased in the city a certain amount, and there's been a corresponding drop in the violence.
But that's trending across the country as well.
I've never believed that those two things exist in a vacuum. They are connected. My concern, and again, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I'm very concerned that the poverty rate is going to go back up for a couple of reasons. The first thing is the child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit was no longer expanded. They took that away. That child tax credit cut child poverty by almost half across the country. And you can't tell me that didn't have a huge impact on violence in this country across the board. Also, with whatever's going to happen out of the federal government now, I think there's going to be greater inequality. And we have to be prepared for that as well. And the two things are linked. I can't say that enough. And, I'm afraid that we're going to see this poverty rate increase, and we're going to see a corresponding rate in crime and violence.
Well, I kind of been thinking a lot about the Center for Journalism and Democracy event that Vanessa and I went to at Howard University a few months ago, and because it was about oligarchy. And what oligarchy is, what oligarchy isn't, and how, there is no such thing as a benign oligarchy. And what you said, Larry, kind of just, made me think about that, particularly when it comes to our city. My fear is that there is going to be a certain amount of anticipatory obedience that goes on here, particularly when it comes to immigrants. When it comes to people who are, below the poverty level, I think there's going to be a certain amount of anticipatory obedience, because right now, if you've been paying attention to the media landscape in particular, which is why I'm glad that Hall Monitor has a lawyer and insurance, because we may need it. You see a lot, like yesterday, Meta, the Facebook people, they just announced that they were going to get rid of fact checking. So on top of all of this, they're going to turn fact checking into community notes, similar to what it is on Twitter, because I refuse to call it X. That's a stupid name, and I'm not going to use it. And while the community notes are good for what they do on Twitter, I don't think that everybody is going to do that on Facebook or on Threads. And the first time that you go on Threads or you go on Facebook and you see like a post where people are just calling folks the N-word, like it was the day that Elon Musk took over Twitter, then you got a problem. But you're going to have misinformation coming out like water from a fire hose. Thanks to that, because so many people get all of their all or most of their information from social media, you're going to have so much misinformation that all of the stuff that we're talking about is you're going to have people who believe stuff that isn't actually the truth, and they're going to make decisions based on that. And my fear is that some of those people are going to be the very elected officials that we need to keep their heads in the game, and to remember that, one of the first things we were taught in journalism school: if your mama says she loves you, have that verified by at least 2 sources, because not everybody's going to practice that. And I think that's going to make an already bad situation exponentially worse.
Yeah, Denise, I just want to add to that President Trump, or, I guess they still call him President Trump. Once you're president, you always you're always named as president. He did a press conference from Mar-a-Lago this week where he was asked about the fact checking being stopped at Meta, and whether or not he had anything to do with it. And he confirmed, he said that, yes, he had talked with Mark Zuckerberg about it and asked him to get rid of it. And so this connection between billionaires, right, that are surrounding President Trump right now can lead to these types of decisions that infiltrate the private sector, right? Privately owned company, and not in a good way, right? Mm-hmm. President Trump could talk to the health insurance companies and say, hey, can you stop denying claims? But we don't see him asking them to do stuff like that, right? Which I think people would agree, like, that would be a good thing to talk to some of these millionaire and billionaire CEOs. Instead, he's doing things to make it more favorable to him and his administration. And we really have to watch closely, again, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, right? The decision of Jeff Bezos and Mr. Moon, I'm his first name is
owner of the Los Angeles Times.
Correct. And how they were influenced by Trump not to make any endorsements for Vice President Harris, right? So we're seeing, again, the way the billionaires are swarming President Trump and having a direct effects, right, on these public platforms and these policies. And one last thing is that prior to Meta doing this, they and also X, they eliminated most of their content moderation staff.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not just misinformation or disinformation, but it's also hate speech and violent, abusive, bullying content that's also on there. And so there are very little protections now for people who are users of those platforms. And then they're trying to literally ban TikTok because so many people have espoused pro-Palestine opinions. So again, it's like a really interesting time that we're in right now. And by the way, oral arguments for the TikTok ban are being heard at the Supreme Court on Friday. So we'll have to pay attention to that as well.
And the fact that you brought up hate speech is very important, because you have a lot of people out there who believe that hate speech online never becomes real, never translates into real life. I covered hate groups in Reading, Pennsylvania, and a friend of mine, God rest her soul, was literally run out of town by a hate group out of Bridesburg in Northeast Philly that started out harassing her online. So, let's not understate what Vanessa is saying here about, moderation, being swept to the side and hate speech being allowed to propagate, because it can have real life consequences.
Yeah. And Vanessa, I think you said something that is probably the reason why I'm sitting in this chair and on the show right now. Billionaires are always going to stick together. There's no other ideology than money. They don't care. They don't care about anything else. They'll work with the left, they'll work with the right. It doesn't matter. That's why class solidarity is so important, especially at a time like this. That's why unions are important. That's why mutual aid is important. And that's why, like, small independent news like us is important, because we're going to yell about this. And that's, if you ask me why we're all here, the answer might be anger, because of the way these things are. I know it is for me.
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of what to look forward to, because I know we only have about a minute left, you can look forward to more, independent coverage from us, right? Reporting the facts. We, unlike Meta, we will be fact checking, right? We will be holding billionaires accountable. We will be following the money, and we will definitely be keeping tabs on the mayor and the governor's administration and all of these elections that are injected with millions and billions of dollars.
All right. Well, and we're going to leave it there. So we'll be back next week on Home Under. We're going to preview the 2025 Spring Council, which will begin the following week, Denise. The 23rd, you and I will be back sitting next to each other on Reporters Row at City Council. I'm looking forward to it. And so we will see you all next week on Hall Monitor.
Thank you so much for watching and listening.